Welcome to the History Maps podcast.
Let's get right into the sources.
Yeah. So, when you look at the structure of ancient religious authority, it often resembles a heavily guarded, impenetrable fortress.
Right. That's a good way to picture it.
You have the towering walls of complex rituals, a specialized class of guards acting as intermediaries, and, a language of access Sanskrit that the vast majority of people simply do not speak.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just walk through the front gates. I mean, you need the right birth, the right training, and the financial resources to afford the right offerings.
That is a very accurate assessment of the Vedic ritualistic landscape prior to the 7th century.
Okay.
Access to the divine was highly mediated. The religious economy really relied on a strict compartmentalization of duties, and those were heavily restricted by social hierarchies.
Right.
So the performance of a ritual required precise knowledge, specific materials, and, an ordained priest to execute it.
So for the average person, interacting with the divine was entirely transactional.
Entirely. And managed by a third party.
But then a subtle shift begins to occur in the subcontinent. Someone realizes they don't need to lay siege to the fortress.
Yeah, they bypass it entirely.
Right. They discover a river flowing right past the walls, a river of direct, unmediated devotion.
And the water in this river is available to absolutely anyone willing to drink, regardless of their birth or their wealth.
So today we are doing a comprehensive deep dive on that river. We are looking at the Bhakti Movement.
Yes.
Which was this massive socio-religious phenomenon that fundamentally transformed the Indian subcontinent, basically spanning from the 7th to the 17th centuries.
Right, and we'll be tracing its evolution from its origins in the Tamil-speaking South, all the way to its vast expansion across the northern plains.
That's our mission for this deep dive. We really want to unpack the profound theological shifts it introduced.
And the radical social implications it carried for the caste system and patriarchy, and the enduring cultural legacy it left behind.
Yeah, and to do that, we are drawing upon a wide array of historical documents, philosophical texts, poetry, and sociological analyses provided in the sources.
We want to construct a highly detailed picture of this centuries-long development for you.
So let's start at the conceptual foundation, the word itself, bhakti.
Right, the language is key here.
Before we get to the wandering poets and the social revolutions, we need to understand the linguistic and theological framework. Where does this specific term originate?
The etymology provides a critical baseline for our understanding. The term bhakti is derived from the Sanskrit root bhaj.
Bhaj. And what does that signify regarding human behavior?
It translates to dividing, sharing, partaking, or participating.
Okay.
It also carries a secondary connotation of serving or honoring. And this linguistic root is vital.
Why is that so crucial?
Because it establishes that bhakti did not emerge as a passive state of mind, or, a quiet ritualistic observance.
It wasn't just sitting still.
Right. It was conceptualized as a highly participatory path.
Okay, so it required the active, ongoing engagement of an individual's behavior, right?
Exactly. Their daily ethics and a deeply internalized spirituality. It's really the act of sharing a relationship with the divine.
So it's not a matter of checking boxes on a religious to-do list.
No, not at all.
Or like paying someone else to perform a sacrifice on your behalf.
Right. The individual has to actively participate in the relationship.
And while the movement reached its most visible mass popularity between the 7th and 17th centuries, the earliest textual roots of this devotion can be found much earlier, right?
Yes, significantly earlier. We see the foundational concepts in the Shatashvatara Upanishad.
And that dates roughly between 400 and 200 BCE, correct?
Correct. Furthermore, the Bhagavad Gita serves as a primary ancient text that extensively outlines this framework.
So these texts began to articulate a new theological core.
Right, known as Bhakti Marga, which translates to the path of devotion.
Let's contextualize that for a second. The path of devotion was positioned as an alternative to the systems that already held a monopoly on salvation.
Yes, historically, there were two dominant avenues for spiritual liberation before this.
And the first one was?
The first was Jnana Marga, the path of knowledge. This required rigorous intellectual pursuit, extensive study of the Vedas, and deep philosophical meditation.
Which naturally restricted it to those who had the time and education.
And the social standing to study, yes. The second was Karma Marga, the path of ritual action.
Right, and that required the precise execution of complex sacrifices and ceremony.
which again required the mediation of the priestly class and often significant financial expenditure for materials.
So here's a way for you to conceptualize the profound difference between Karma Marga and the newly developing Bhakti Marga.
It's a stark contrast.
Following Karma Marga operates very much like adhering to a rigid, unforgiving legal contract. You perform action A, and the cosmos is obligated to deliver result B. But if you mispronounce a single Sanskrit syllable during a chant, or, if you offer the wrong type of grain into the ritual
The
fire.
contract is void.
Exactly. The universe does not care about your good intentions. It cares about absolute precision.
But Bhakti Marga operates entirely differently. It functions like an unconditional dynamic personal relationship.
So the deity's response is based on the emotional sincerity of the devotee.
Yes, not the technical perfection of the offering. That distinction highlights the exact mechanism of the theological shift.
And this framework rested entirely on two new pillars that rendered those old contracts obsolete.
Right. The first pillar is prapatti, which means absolute, unconditional, devotional surrender to the deity.
Okay, surrender. And the second?
The second pillar is kripa, which translates to divine grace.
So let's examine the social consequences of those two pillars.
They're massive.
If salvation is suddenly based on surrender and grace rather than precision and wealth, how did this redefine who had access to spiritual liberation in medieval Indian society?
It radically and systematically democratized access.
Because under the older frameworks, salvation was contingent upon immense human effort.
And resources. A person was bound by their karma, the accumulated consequences of their past actions across lifetimes.
And breaking those karmic bonds required extreme asceticism.
Or a lifetime of philosophical inquiry or very expensive mediation.
But the theology of bhakti shifted the locus of salvation entirely away from human effort.
It placed it squarely in the hands of divine grace.
So the deity's boundless compassion becomes the active mechanism that dissolves a person's karmic bonds.
The individual just has to surrender.
Yeah.
And because surrender costs nothing and requires no literacy.
The doors to liberation were suddenly thrown open to everyone.
Yes.
But abstract theology needs a practical application.
Right, you need instructions.
Yeah, if you tell a farmer or a weaver that they just need to, surrender, they need a methodology. They need to know what to do when they wake up in the morning.
The religious texts adapted to provide exactly that. The Bhagavata Purana, a vital text for this movement, outlines 9 practical limbs of devotion.
Known as Navada Bhakti.
Exactly. These were highly specific, actionable practices designed for ordinary people.
Walk us through some of these 9 limbs because the genius here seems to be in their absolute simplicity.
They were deliberately designed for daily, unmediated practice. The first is Sravana, which is simply the act of hearing divine narratives.
So in a pre-literate society, sitting and listening to stories of the divine was an accessible starting point.
Right. Then there is Kirtana, the act of chanting or singing the deity's names and glories.
Which anyone can do.
Right. The third is Smarana, which is the constant inner remembrance of the deity.
So a person could practice Smarana while tilling a field, weaving cloth, or cooking a meal.
Exactly. Another vital limb is Dasya, cultivating the internal attitude of a dedicated servant toward the divine.
So none of these practices required a temple.
None required a priest, and none required wealth. They could be performed by any individual at any moment of the day.
The psychological relief that must have provided to the lower classes is immense.
Unquantifiable, really.
You're no longer spiritually condemned simply because of your socioeconomic status.
Right.
So this democratization of spiritual access found its earliest, most explosive mass expression in the southern regions of the subcontinent.
That is where we see it transition from a textual theory into a physical reality that altered the landscape.
We're looking at Tamilakam, modern-day South India, roughly between the 7th and 10th centuries.
This specific region and time frame marked the genesis of Bhakti as a sweeping popular force.
And the movement was spearheaded by 2 distinct parallel groups of wandering poet-saints.
On one side of the theological spectrum, you have the 12 Vaishnava Alvars.
The term Alvar roughly translates to those immersed in God, right?
Yes, and their devotion was directed entirely toward Vishnu and his avatar.
Okay, and on the parallel side?
You have the 63 Shaiva Nayanars, who directed equally intense devotion toward Shiva.
We must look at the specific individuals leading this charge because they set the template for the next 1,000 years.
They really did.
Among the 12 Alvars, Namalvar stands out for his prolific output, shaping the philosophical core of Vaishnava devotion.
And we also have Andal.
Right, an incredibly significant figure. She is the sole female Alvar, and her poetry remains central to South Indian culture today.
And on the Shaiva side, among the 63 Nayanars, the tradition often highlights the Tivaram trio.
Which is Apar, Samvander, and Sundar.
But the most revolutionary choice these saints made was not just their theology, it was their medium of communication.
That is a crucial point. These poet saints made the strategic, highly consequential decision to compose their hymns entirely in the Tamil vernacular.
They completely bypassed Sanskrit, the established language of religious authority.
The sociolinguistic implications of that choice are massive. By choosing Tamil, the language of the streets, the markets, and the home, they essentially bypassed the Brahmanical monopoly on religious texts.
Right. Suddenly, the most profound theological concepts are available directly to the masses.
This includes Shudras, the laboring classes, and women.
All of whom were strictly and traditionally excluded from reading or even hearing the recitation of the Sanskrit Vedas.
So it was a linguistic revolution that directly fueled a religious one.
Furthermore, their methodology of spreading this vernacular theology was highly mobile.
Right, they weren't stationary philosophers sitting in a single academy.
They adopted an itinerant lifestyle. They walked continuously from village to village and from temple to temple.
And as they traveled, they composed deeply emotional hymns tailored to the specific local deities and the surrounding natural landscapes.
So they were effectively rewriting the map of the region.
By composing a famous hymn at a specific local shrine, they elevated the status of that shrine. They established entirely new pilgrimage routes.
A location like Srirangam, for example.
Right. It grew into a massive religious hub, not initially by the decree of a king, but because the devotional poetry of the Alvars saturated the site with sacred significance.
They created a new sacred geography for South India based on poetry rather than royal charters.
And it is notable that they were not operating in a religious vacuum, were they?
No, they were entering a highly contested intellectual space. During this period, Jainism and Buddhism enjoyed privileged status.
And significant patronage at various South Indian courts, such as those of the Pallava and Pandya dynasties.
Right. The Alvars and Nayanars actively and aggressively opposed these established traditions.
They engaged in public philosophical debates, right?
And displayed acts of intense, sometimes miraculous devotion designed specifically to win over political leaders and the populace.
Let's examine a specific historical example of that political intersection. You mentioned the Tivaram trio of the Nayanars. Apar is a prime example of this dynamic.
Apar's life illustrates this political friction perfectly. He was initially a Jain ascetic himself before converting to Shaivism.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. His subsequent fervent devotion to Shiva brought him into direct conflict with the Pallava king, Mahendravarman I, who was a staunch patron of Jainism.
And according to historical narratives, the king subjected Apar to severe tortures to test his faith.
All of which Apar survived through divine grace. This unshakable devotion profoundly influenced King Mahendravarman I.
Leading to his own conversion to Shaivism.
Exactly. And when a king converts, state resources, temple building, and royal patronage shift dramatically.
So this royal backing severely weakened Jainism and Buddhism in the region and vastly accelerated the spread of the Bhakti movement.
Right.
I have to say, looking at the sources, it's quite a volume of material produced by these wandering poets. It wasn't just a handful of songs.
We are talking about the Divya Prabandham, a massive collection of 4,000 verses compiled from the 12 Alvars.
And on the Shaiva side, you have the Tirumurai, an extensive multi-volume compilation of Nayanar poetry.
It's a huge corpus.
Given that these movements began as anti-establishment, grassroots phenomena, wandering outside the orthodox structures, how did these vernacular texts eventually become the foundational scriptures for formalized, mainstream religious traditions like Sri Vaishnavism and Shaiva Siddhanta?
The process of institutionalization is one of the most compelling aspects of this history.
How did that happen?
Well, over the span of a few centuries, the sheer popularity, emotional resonance of these Tamil hymns meant they could no longer be dismissed or ignored by the religious elite.
They were just too loud to ignore.
Right. So in the 10th and 11th centuries, brilliant theologians recognized the power of this mass movement.
Figures like Nathamuni.
And later the philosopher Ramanuja. They began to systematically compile the scattered Tamil songs of the Alvars.
So they engaged in a complex theological synthesis.
They integrated the emotional vernacular poetry of the masses with the formal, highly structured Sanskrit theology of the Upanishads.
So they basically built a bridge between the wandering poet in the dust and the orthodox scholar in the temple.
Precisely. By doing so, they legitimized the vernacular poetry.
They argued that the Tamil revelations of the Alvars were equal in spiritual authority to the ancient Sanskrit Vedas.
The result is that the anti-establishment songs of rebellion and direct devotion became the new establishment liturgy.
That's quite a turnaround.
Yeah, these Tamil hymns were eventually chanted daily inside the very temple complexes that the early saints had originally wandered to as outsiders.
They infiltrated the fortress and eventually became the architects of a new expanded fortress. That is a notable historical trajectory.
It really is.
While the Alvars and Nayyanars challenged the status quo primarily through poetry, pilgrimage, and emotional devotion, a few centuries later in neighboring Karnataka, the movement took on a drastically different tone.
Yes, it adopted a formalized institutional structure aimed at a total, uncompromising social overhaul.
So we are shifting our focus to the 12th century.
This is during the reign of the Kalyani, Chalukya, and Kalashuri dynasties in the Deccan region.
Specifically, we are looking at the period under King Bajala II.
Right. This era witnessed the rise of a highly influential philosopher, poet, and statesman named Basava.
Who lived from 1131 to 1196.
Yes. Basava energized and provided massive structural momentum to what became known as the Lingayat movement.
Basava is a uniquely compelling figure in this narrative. He didn't just write beautiful poetry about equality. He attempted to implement systemic, structural change.
He was very pragmatic about it?
He flat out rejected the necessity of temple worship. He condemned Brahmin-led rituals. He fought against gender discrimination. And he launched a direct assault on the entire concept of the caste system.
To understand the radical nature of Basava's reforms, we have to look at how he fundamentally altered the mechanics of daily worship.
Okay, tell us about that.
Basava introduced the concept of the Ishtalinga. The Ishtalinga is a small, personalized, egg-shaped icon of Shiva.
And the revolutionary aspect is that this icon is worn on a necklace by every single devotee.
Right, resting against their body at all times.
Let's analyze the semiotics of that object. In the traditional system, the divine resides in the stavara, the static, immovable temple, controlled by priests who dictate who can enter.
Exactly. But by introducing the Ishtalinga, Basava creates the Jangama, the moving, dynamic temple.
So you no longer need to travel to a designated sacred site.
You no longer need to pay a priest to perform a ritual on your behalf.
The divine presence is brought directly to the individual, resting against the chest of a weaver, a farmer, or a woman, regardless of their birth status.
The body itself becomes the temple.
That theological shift provided the foundation for Basava's broader socioeconomic reforms.
Right, because if everyone carries the divine equally on their chest, then the social hierarchies defining purity and pollution must be false.
And from this, Basava introduced two highly sophisticated economic and social concepts.
The first was Kayaka, which translates to the principle of work as worship.
Kayaka established the absolute dignity of all labor.
It asserted that no profession, whether it was weaving, farming, or making shoes, was impure or beneath spiritual merit.
Work performed with truthfulness and dedication was equal to any priestly ritual.
That immediately elevates the status of the entire laboring class.
And it feeds directly into his second concept, right?
Yes. The second concept was Dasoha, which centered on the equitable sharing of wealth and resource redistribution.
The principle dictated that one must work hard, earn honestly, but retain only what is necessary for survival.
The surplus wealth must be given back to the community and used for the welfare of others.
It was an early framework for social security and resource sharing, deeply rooted in devotional ethics.
But Basava didn't just leave these ideas as abstract theories.
Right. He built a physical institution to foster them. He created the Anupava Mantapa,
which translates to the hall of spiritual experience.
We need to examine what actually happened inside this hall. It wasn't a traditional monastery where a guru lectured in silence.
No, it was essentially a spiritual and social democracy.
Men and women from all socioeconomic backgrounds gathered openly. You had boatmen, cobblers, tailors, and merchants sitting alongside former royals and Brahmins.
They debated theology, they discussed the mundane struggles of daily life, and they composed poetry known as vachanas.
Everyone had a voice.
He coupled this radical social framework with a strict, uncompromising adherence to ahimsa, or nonviolence.
So Basava strongly condemned both the animal and human sacrifices that were still prevalent in various esoteric cults at the time.
His ultimate vision was a society rooted in ethical purity, nonviolence, and absolute social equality.
Now, looking at the historical reality of 12th century India, I have to challenge this setup based on the sources.
Go ahead.
There is a massive inherent tension here. Basava wasn't just a wandering ascetic living in the forest. He was the chief minister, the treasurer, to King Bijala II.
He was at the absolute zenith of state power.
How does an individual actively dismantle the rigid social hierarchy of caste and privilege from within the highest echelons of a state system that is built upon that very hierarchy?
Yeah, tension is central to the Lingayat narrative.
It seems like an unsustainable contradiction.
It highlights the severe limits of attempting radical reform from within an orthodox power structure. Basava utilized state resources, his wealth, and his political protection to establish the Anupava Mantapa.
And to provide a safe haven for his followers, who are known as the Sharanas.
However, pushing a platform of absolute egalitarianism from a seat of state power inevitably triggered immense organized backlash.
From the Orthodox religious establishment and the conservative nobility, right?
Yes. They viewed his actions not just as heresy, but as a direct threat to the socioeconomic order of the kingdom.
And that tension couldn't hold forever. It eventually snapped.
The tension reached a violent breaking point over a specific application of Basava's egalitarian principles.
What happened?
The Sharanas facilitated an intercaste marriage between the children of two devotees.
Okay.
One was from a Brahmin background and the other was from a cobbler background.
In 12th century society, that was the ultimate violation of caste law.
The resulting fury from the Orthodox establishment forced King Bijala II to take severe state action. The fathers of the bride and groom were brutally executed.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is a severe escalation.
It sparked violent retribution, chaos within the capital, the eventual assassination of King Bijala II, and Basava's departure from the city just before his death.
It serves as a stark historical demonstration that while political power can temporarily shelter social reform, it cannot always protect it from deeply entrenched cultural and institutional resistance.
The political establishment violently crushed the physical manifestation of the reform, but the ideas themselves survived.
They scattered. The egalitarian ethos cultivated in the Anupava Mantapa of Karnataka soon flowed north and west.
It found a deeply resonant, highly communal expression in the Marathi-speaking regions.
So this demographic shift brings us to the late 13th century and the gradual emergence of the Varkari tradition in the region of Maharashtra.
Unlike the multifaceted theology of the South, this tradition centered entirely on the devotion to a specific manifestation of the divine.
The worship of Vithoba, also known as Vithal.
Yes, Vithoba is understood as a regional incarnation of Vishnu, and his primary residence is the temple town of Pentarpur.
The Varkari sect has a remarkably distinct and enduring character. The leadership of this movement came from a lineage of key saints, which is the regional term for saints spanning several centuries.
You have Janeshwar in the late 13th century. He was a brilliant intellectual who, at a remarkably young age, authored the Janeshwari.
This was a massive, highly accessible Marathi commentary on the Bhagavad Gita.
Then, moving through the centuries, you have Namdev, who was a tailor by profession.
You have Eknath, a scholar who challenged caste norms.
And in the 17th century, you have Tukaram, a Shudra merchant whose poetry remains iconic.
The Varkari path they forged was characterized by highly specific, yet accessible, ethical requirements.
To be a practicing member of this tradition required strict adherence to a simple, non-violent way of life.
This included maintaining a strict vegetarian diet,
The continuous wearing of a rosary made of holy basil, or tulsi, around the neck.
a vow to harm no living creature, and the constant rhythmic recitation of a specific, simple mantra, Ramakrishna Hari.
It was a life of disciplined purity, but one that could be practiced by a householder, a farmer, or a merchant.
The ethical rules were the foundation, but the absolute heartbeat, the defining physical action of the Varkari tradition, is the Wari.
This is the annual massive pilgrimage to the temple at Pentarpur.
We need to examine the mechanics of this pilgrimage closely because it is not just a long walk. It is a highly organized, moving society.
Right. Picture thousands, eventually hundreds of thousands, of devotees known as Varkaris.
They leave their villages and walk for weeks across the Deccan Plateau.
They travel in specific organized groups called a dindi.
Within a single dindi, you have individuals from every conceivable caste background walking shoulder to shoulder in the dust and the rain.
They are singing continuously, they're delivering impassioned spiritual discourses called curtains, and they are taking turns carrying heavy wooden palanquins that hold the symbolic footprints of the past saints.
Through the sheer, overwhelming physical exhaustion of the journey, the constant proximity of bodies, and the shared hardship of the road, the rigid, oppressive social boundaries that govern their daily lives in their home villages begin to completely dissolve.
That physical dissolution of societal boundaries on the road was mirrored in their immense literary output.
The Varkari movement was instrumental in systematically elevating the Marathi language.
The Thates took the most complex, abstract theology of the Sanskrit scriptures and effectively vernacularized it.
They composed abhangas, which are highly emotional, short devotional hymns meant to be sung by crowds.
They utilized ois, a traditional meter often sung by village women, while performing the physical labor of grinding grain.
They also wrote baruds, which were dramatic, allegorical poems that used everyday village characters.
Like a snake charmer or a blind man to explain complex spiritual truths.
They turned high philosophy into the folk songs of the laboring classes.
They really did.
I want to focus on an aspect of the Wari pilgrimage that might seem mundane to a modern observer, but was actually a revolutionary mechanism of social disruption. Commensality.
The simple act of people stopping to eat their meals together.
Exactly. Can you detail the mechanics of ritual purity to explain why this specific act of eating together struck such a devastating blow against the rules of the caste system?
It is essential to understand how deeply food consumption regulates and enforces hierarchy in orthodox caste systems.
Okay, lay that out for us.
In traditional frameworks, the rules governing food are incredibly rigid. Who you can accept water from, who you are permitted to sit next to while eating, and most importantly, who is allowed to prepare and cook your meal.
These are all strictly governed by concepts of ritual purity and pollution.
Right. Sharing a meal across caste lines, particularly with someone deemed an untouchable, was considered a severe violation that transferred ritual pollution and could result in immediate social excommunication.
Therefore, when the Varkardis stopped their march, prepared communal food, and sat down to eat together in the dirt during the Wari, they were not just sharing sustenance.
They were performing a highly visible, radical, public dismantling of the core mechanics of untouchability.
It was theological equality put into direct, undeniable physical practice.
Yes.
It is the ultimate manifestation of action over theory. You can preach equality, but sitting down to share a plate of food proves it.
Absolutely.
Now, this intense communal devotion that unified massive crowds in Maharashtra soon migrated further north,
Moving deep into the Gangetic Plains.
and as the Bhakti movement expanded into northern India between the 15th and 17th centuries, it bifurcated.
Yes, this bifurcation is a defining characteristic of the northern Bhakti landscape.
It split into two very distinct, highly sophisticated philosophical approaches: the worship of a god with attributes and the worship of a god entirely without form.
The movement diversified into two primary streams of thought and practice, Saguna and Nirguna.
Saguna literally translates to with qualities or with attributes.
This refers to devotion directed toward a deity who possesses a distinct physical form, a specific personality, divine attributes, and a mythological narrative.
In the northern context, this almost exclusively meant devotion to the avatars of Vishnu, specifically Rama or Krishna.
Nirguna, conversely, translates to without qualities.
This stream directed devotion toward the absolute, unmanifest, formless divine.
A divine presence that cannot be captured in a statue, a specific name, or a mythological story.
Let's establish the key figures leading these two very different streams. On the Saguna side, the literature is incredibly rich.
You have Sudas, a legendary blind poet who composed thousands of intricate verses in Braj Bhasha, focusing intensely on the childhood and romantic life of Krishna.
You have Tulsidas, a monumental figure who authored the Ramcharitmanas in the Awadhi dialect.
He essentially took the ancient Sanskrit Ramayana and rewrote it for the masses, making the story of Rama accessible to millions.
And moving eastward to Bengal, you have Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
He popularized Gaudiya Vaishnavism and completely transformed the nature of worship by taking devotion straight out of the temples and into the streets with Sankirtan.
Which involves ecstatic, public group chanting and dancing.
And on the opposing Nirguna side, the figures are equally monumental, though entirely different in their approach.
You have Kabir, who lived roughly from 1440 to 1518. He was an illiterate weaver from the sacred city of
You
Varanasi.
have Ravidas, a mystic who belonged to a highly marginalized, untouchable community of shoemakers and leatherworkers.
And you have Dadu Dayal, a cotton carter who founded his own sect.
It is critical to understand that these two paths, Saguna and Nirguna, are not just different in how they picture God in their minds.
They have entirely different ultimate end goals.
Their soteriologies, their definitions of salvation, are fundamentally distinct.
If we analyze the ultimate goal of salvation in the Saguna framework, devotees generally aimed for a relocation of the soul after death to a specific divine realm, such as Vaikuntha, the abode of Vishnu.
In this elevated state, the devotee explicitly retains their individual identity, their distinct ego.
Why?
Because retaining individuality is necessary to engage in eternal, blissful service to the deity, a concept known as Kenkaryam.
The theology requires dualism. It requires the eternal separation of the lover and the beloved so that the relationship of love can continue forever.
Whereas the Nirguna path looks at ultimate salvation through a much more abstract, almost absolute lens.
Yes, Nirguna devotees were not interested in traveling to a heavenly realm to serve a king-like deity.
They sought profound, immediate inner realization. Their goal was an egoless absorption directly into the immanent absolute.
A state often referred to as samadhi.
The ultimate objective is the complete, permanent dissolution of dualistic perception.
The individual soul merges entirely with the formless divine, losing all separate identity, much like a single drop of water returning to and disappearing within the vast ocean.
Let's dive deeply into the lives and poetry of Kabir and Ravidas, because their specific impact on the social and cultural fabric of northern India was massive.
Kabir is legendary for his use of Hindi dohas, or short couplets. He used stark, aggressive, and highly paradoxical imagery drawn from his life as a weaver.
He did not write polite hymns. He fiercely and relentlessly critiqued both Hindu and Islamic orthodoxies.
He verbally attacked the hypocrisy of the priestly classes. He mocked the performance of empty rituals.
And he openly ridiculed the practice of idol worship, arguing that God cannot be confined to a piece of stone.
While Kabir focused heavily on deconstructing the existing structures with sharp, unyielding critique, his contemporary, Ravidas, offered a highly constructive, visionary alternative.
Ravidas, drawing from the intense social marginalization of his profession handling animal hides, articulated the profound concept of Begumpura.
Begumpura literally translates to the city without sorrow. It was a conceptual utopian vision of society.
In Begumpura, there is no caste discrimination, there is no social hierarchy, there is no unequal distribution of wealth, and there is not even the burden of unjust taxation.
Ravidas seamlessly blended the pursuit of ultimate spiritual liberation with a highly specific political demand for social justice and civic equality.
This contrast is endlessly fascinating. We have two men from the same region, representing the same Nirguna philosophy, yet their rhetorical tones are night and day.
Kabir's tone is sharp, mocking, highly confrontational, and designed to offend the orthodox. He aggressively calls out the hypocrites in the streets.
Ravidas, on the other hand, is steady, compassionate, deeply thoughtful, and highly utopian.
Did these differing rhetorical styles appeal to completely different demographics within society, or did they function as two necessary phases of the same social reform?
That is an astute observation regarding the communication strategies inherent in social movements.
Because they were both marginalized.
Both Kabir and Ravidas belong to marginalized laboring groups. However, Kabir's confrontational, abrasive style resonated powerfully with urban artisans, merchants, and those who felt an acute daily frustration with the visible hypocrisy of institutional religion.
Kabir's language was a deliberate shock tactic.
It was designed to jolt the listener out of their dogmatic complacency.
Ravidas's compassionate, visionary approach appealed profoundly to those at the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy.
For individuals crushed by the stigma of untouchability, Ravidas offered immediate dignity, hope, and a constructive framework for building a new community.
Ultimately, they functioned symbiotically.
Kabir acted as the demolition crew, clearing the brush by destroying falsehoods.
While Ravidas acted as the architect, planting the seeds of a new, equitable vision for society.
Kabir tears down the old city, and Ravidas draws the blueprints for the new one.
Now, among the many entrenched barriers these various poet saints challenged across the centuries, the caste system, complex ritualism, orthodox hypocrisy, perhaps the most universally pervasive and deeply rooted barrier was patriarchy.
The Bhakti Movement, almost as a byproduct of its theology, provided a truly unprecedented historical avenue for female expression, literacy, and autonomy.
To appreciate the magnitude of this, we must establish the historical context. Medieval Indian society was strictly patriarchal.
Women were rigidly confined to domestic roles, managing the household, child-rearing, and serving their husbands.
They were largely excluded from formal education, scriptural study, and positions of religious authority.
The Bhakti movement, however, fundamentally bypassed this structure.
By emphasizing spontaneous inner emotion over formal, external ritual, it offered a unique, unmediated space for women to subvert those societal norms.
The divine did not require them to read Sanskrit. The divine only required their love.
And as a result, we see incredibly prominent female voices emerging across every region we have discussed.
We already highlighted Endal in the Deep South.
In Karnataka, associated with Basava's movement, you have the fiercely independent Akka Manadevi.
In the deserts of Rajasthan, you have the universally recognized Mirabai, a Rajput princess.
And within the Varkari tradition of Maharashtra, we see a multitude of voices from various classes, including Janabai, Muktabai, and Bahinabai.
What unites these diverse women is how they utilize the medium of devotional poetry.
They used it not just to express love for God, but to explicitly and publicly critique both caste and gender oppression.
For these women, spiritual devotion transformed into an active, lived space of resistance.
The concept of an all-consuming relationship with the divine became a legitimate, culturally recognized refuge from the severe, often suffocating confines of domestic duty and marital subjugation.
Let's examine specific contrasting examples to see how this resistance manifested in daily life. Take Janabai.
She belonged to a highly marginalized caste background and worked her entire life as a domestic servant in the household of the Varkari saint Namdev.
Unlike an aristocratic ascetic, she did not have the luxury of abandoning her duties to retreat to a forest to meditate.
Instead, her poetry is revolutionary because it intimately integrates her mundane, exhausting daily chores directly into her theology.
She sings about the physical labor of sweeping the floors, grinding the grain with a heavy stone, and fetching water.
In her poetry, God is not a distant king. God is a companion who physically helps her with the housework.
And if we look at the absolute opposite end of the socioeconomic spectrum, we find Mirabai, whose rebellion was entirely different but equally profound.
As a Rajput princess, her societal expectations were heavily dictated by royal duty, political alliances, marital compliance, and strict codes of aristocratic honor.
Mirabai entirely abandoned her royal status. She actively refused her marital obligations, publicly declaring that she was married only to the divine form of Krishna.
Because her actions were viewed as a catastrophic stain on royal honor, she faced severe persecution from her in-laws.
Historical traditions recount her surviving multiple assassination attempts, including being sent poison, but she prioritized her intense public devotion over all societal mandates of how a princess should behave.
It is striking that for many of these women, liberation was not just a high-minded, abstract theological concept to be debated.
It was a literal physical escape.
Akka Mahadevi and Mirabai literally walked out the door of their homes and never returned.
Which raises a complex historical question regarding the internal dynamics of the movement.
Did the prominent male saints of the Bhakti movement, who preached universal equality, actually support this radical female autonomy?
Or did these women have to carve this space out entirely on their own, essentially fighting the male reformers as well as the orthodox establishment?
The historical evidence reveals a profound ambivalence within the movement itself.
While the male saints eagerly preached the universal equality of all souls before God, they often remained deeply anchored to traditional social norms regarding family structures and domestic order.
Many male reformers were perfectly comfortable with female devotion, provided it remained private and did not aggressively disrupt the patriarchal household.
When women like Mirabai or Akka Mahadevi rejected marriage entirely, refused domestic duties, and wandered publicly among crowds of men, they faced severe criticism and resistance.
This backlash sometimes came even from fellow male ascetics who viewed independent, wandering women with deep suspicion.
Consequently, these female saints largely had to carve out and defend this autonomous space entirely on their own.
They used their unassailable, intense devotion to God as their singular, impenetrable shield against the outrage of both the Orthodox society and their own fellow reformers.
They forced the issue through sheer willpower and poetry.
Now, the Bhakti movement obviously did not develop in a vacuum. As it swept across the northern plains, particularly from the 13th century onward, it encountered, interacted with, and was shaped by another powerful mystical tradition that had newly arrived in the subcontinent.
You are referring to the major geopolitical shifts of the era,
Yeah.
the arrival of Islam, the gradual establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, and specifically the introduction and spread of the Sufi movement across India.
Right. And when we look at Sufism and the Bhakti movement side by side, there are some remarkable structural parallels.
Both traditions heavily emphasize the primacy of inner devotion and purity of heart over the strict adherence to rigid religious laws.
Both sought a deeply personal, mystical union with the divine.
And crucially, both movements recognize the absolute necessity of utilizing vernacular languages to reach the masses.
Just as the Bhakti saints composed in Hindi, Marathi, or Bengali, Sufi mystics frequently use localized Persian, Arabic, or regional dialects to compose their poetry and instruct their followers.
These historical intersections were highly generative and led to profound theological syntheses. The most prominent example is the formation of Sikhism.
Guru Nanak, who lived from 1469 to 1539, emerged from a very similar Sant Mat or Nirguna background in the Punjab region.
He vehemently rejected the caste system, he rejected idolatry, and he preached a message of universal equality under a formless God.
Furthermore, demonstrating a clear, intentional continuity of these reformist ideas, he and his successors explicitly integrated the verses of previous Nirguna saints, specifically the poetry of Kabir, Namdev, and Ravidas,
Directly into the foundational Sikh scripture, the Adi Granth, which later became the eternal Guru, the Guru Granth Sahib.
Now, when discussing this specific period of history, the rise of the Northern Bhakti movement coinciding with the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, there is a major ongoing historiographical debate among scholars regarding causality.
Why did the Northern movement explode exactly when it did?
On one side, some scholars argue that the Bhakti movement surged primarily as a direct defensive response.
They posit that the loss of Hindu political power, the destruction of major temples, and the socio-political disruptions caused by Islamic incursions forced a psychological pivot toward an internalized, highly portable form of faith.
On the other side, many scholars argue that this is a misreading of history.
They assert that the Bhakti movement was simply an organic, indigenous evolution of ancient Vedic and Upanishadic traditions, heavily influenced by the Southern Alvar and Nayanar movements,
Which had been steadily migrating north for centuries, completely independent of any Islamic presence.
It is essential to approach this debate impartially and recognize that the academic community remains divided, as historical evidence supports elements of both interpretations.
There is robust evidence supporting the claim of internal indigenous social reform.
The theological frameworks clearly trace back to the Southern movements and ancient texts, long before any significant political shifts in the North. The grievances against caste and orthodox ritual were deeply internal issues.
Conversely, one cannot ignore the geopolitical context.
The socio-political disruptions and the dismantling of traditional state-sponsored temple hierarchies under the sultanates likely provided a powerful catalyst, creating an environment where a decentralized, highly accessible, and portable form of devotion became socially necessary.
The reality is that both complex internal evolutions and significant external political pressures played intersecting roles in shaping the Northern movement.
As we move forward in time, the fluid, spontaneous, and highly individualistic nature of these movements inevitably began to alter. By the 18th century, the landscape looks very different.
We see heavy, entrenched institutionalization. The followers of Kabir have formalized into the Kabir path. The followers of Dadu Dayal have organized into the Dadu path.
Institutionalization brought significant structural alterations to the core identity of these movements.
As generations passed, these fluid communities evolved into highly organized panths, or distinct sects. They acquired property, built monasteries, and required administration.
In many cases, to manage these growing institutions, they developed the very things their founders had explicitly despised.
They erected rigid internal hierarchies, creating strict divisions between elevated initiated monks and ordinary lay followers.
Furthermore, the socio-political dynamics shifted drastically. Some sects, like certain branches of the Dadu Panthus, actually transitioned into organized bands of armed warrior ascetics known as Naga Sadhus.
They operated as mercenaries for regional kings or became highly wealthy moneylenders and protectors of trade routes.
And as these institutions amassed wealth and followers, the state naturally sought to intervene and control them, correct?
Yes. The relationship between the Bhakti sects and state power became highly complex.
For example, In Maharashtra, under the powerful Peshwa state, authorities actively intervened in religious affairs, going so far as to strictly prohibit untouchables from entering the main temple complex at Pendarpur.
This was a direct state-enforced reversal of the earlier egalitarian, boundary-dissolving gains made by the Varkaris during the Wari.
In the north, powerful rulers like Sawai Raja Jai Singh actively intervened in the affairs of various sects.
He implemented regulations, enforced strict dress codes for ascetics, and attempted to reform these egalitarian groups to ensure their theological and social practices aligned with the orthodox interests and stability of the state.
Looking at that specific historical trajectory, I have to pose a difficult question based on these sources.
Go on.
We start this narrative with Basava tearing down the concept of static temples, and the Varkaris defying centuries of caste law by eating together in the dust of the road.
But by the 18th century, we have rigid monastic hierarchies, armed mercenaries acting as bankers, and state-enforced caste bans at the very temples these saints made famous.
Is this rigid institutionalization proof that the original, radical, anti-caste mission of the Bhakti movement ultimately failed?
Or is institutionalization simply the inevitable, inescapable fate of every single mass social movement once the original charismatic founders pass away?
That question cuts to the core of how we understand the life cycle of historical social reform.
It is highly tempting to view the 18th century institutionalization as a complete failure, as a tragic betrayal of the original radical egalitarian ethos.
However, sociological and historical analysis suggests a more complex reality.
For a mass movement to survive across several centuries, adapt to vastly diverse geographies, and outlast political upheavals, it must inevitably develop formalized structures, codified texts, and administrative hierarchies.
Without this institutionalization, the profound teachings of Kabir, Ravidas, or Tukaram might have easily faded into complete historical obscurity.
The radical, disruptive edge of the movement was undoubtedly dulled by time and administration, and older pervasive societal hierarchies frequently reasserted themselves within the new religious frameworks.
Yet the essential core survived. The sacred texts were compiled, the vernacular poetry was memorized by millions, and the philosophical ideals of equality were permanently preserved.
They succeeded in creating a permanent, indelible counter-narrative within the broader culture.
This counter-narrative was not erased. It remained embedded in the literature and the songs, ready to be repeatedly revived and utilized by later social reformers in the 19th and 20th centuries.
It was not a failure. It was a pragmatic, albeit imperfect, compromise required for long-term historical survival.
They ensured the ideas survived the winter, so they were still on the shelf, ready to be picked up again when the climate was right.
Which brings us to the ultimate, enduring legacy of this centuries-long phenomenon, and how it continues to shape the modern landscape of the subcontinent today.
If we recapitulate this monumental journey, we observe a phenomenon of staggering scale.
We see a movement that originated with the passionate, localized vernacular hymns of the Tamil Alvars and Nayanars in the Deep South.
It progressed through Basava's ambitious, radical attempts at social engineering and institutional dismantling in the courts of Karnataka.
It marched steadily across the Deccan Plateau with the collective, boundary-erasing physical pilgrimages of the Varkaris.
And it culminated in the fearless, paradigm-shifting, aggressive poetry of figures like Kabir, Ravidas, and Mirabai in the northern plains.
At its core, it systematically democratized access to the divine.
It took the concept of God out of the locked, guarded fortress of Orthodox ritual, and it placed the divine directly into the streets, into the domestic homes, and into the daily, mundane labor of ordinary people.
It provided a powerful, undeniable, and culturally sanctioned voice to the deeply marginalized, to the weavers, the cobblers, the tailors, and the women individuals who had been structurally silenced for generations.
And culturally, perhaps its most tangible legacy is its impact on language. The Bhakti movement systematically elevated and formalized the vernacular languages of the subcontinent.
It proved definitively that profound theological truths, complex philosophy, and high literature did not require a sacred elite language to be adequately understood, debated, or deeply experienced by the human soul.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over as we conclude this extensive deep dive.
Consider the linguistic landscape of South Asia today. Think about the languages spoken across India, Marathi, Hindi, Awadhi, Bengali, Canada.
Hundreds of millions of people speak these languages every single day, using them for commerce, politics, and daily life.
But these languages were codified, syntactically enriched, and preserved for the modern era, not by the formal decrees of ancient kings, and not by the academic pens of elite cloistered scholars.
They were preserved and given immense literary weight by the simple work songs of weavers, the rhythmic chants of shoemakers, the spiritual debates of farmers, and the rebellious, uncompromising poetry of runaway princesses.
What if the most lasting, undeniable legacy of the Bhakti movement is not simply a change in how people worship the divine, but the preservation of the very words they use to define who they are to this day?
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.